Have you ever felt like the world has turned its back on you? In a small town tucked between the towering forests of Washington, a young girl named Raina Blackwater faced a world that seemed to have turned its back on her. Bullied at school, abandoned by those who should have protected her, she found solace not among people, but in the mysterious wilderness surrounding Maple Crossing. One fateful winter, on the edge of despair, she encountered Hearth, a massive, injured creature, unlike anything she had ever seen, with nothing but courage, compassion, and the lessons her mother had quietly taught her. Raina nursed Hearth back to health. Together, they discovered a hidden family of Bigfoot, learned the language of the forest, and forged a bond that bridged the gap between human and nature. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, connection, empathy, and bravery can transform lives. And sometimes, the most unexpected guardians appear when we need them the most. Dear friends, we'd love to know, where are you watching from today? And what's your name? How far could this story travel if we shared it together? From our hearts to yours, we send our warmest greetings and invite you to join our growing community of Bigfoot lovers. If this tale touched you, give us a like and subscribe to our channel so we can continue exploring the wonders of the forest together. The summer light in Maple Crossing never felt sharp or bold. It was a soft kind of sun, a slow, dim glow that slipped through pine needles and brushed the old wooden rooftops like a memory that didn't want to be forgotten. The town sat deep in the embrace of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, a quiet speck of houses and lumber trucks on worn-down roads, where everything smelled faintly of sap and sawdust. Children played baseball in dusty fields. Workers from the mill stepped out for cigarettes at noon. Dogs barked at everything except the bones hidden in this land. From above, Maple Crossing appeared peaceful, but the forest knew better. Behind the elementary school, in a patch of dry grass near a chain-link fence, a 9-year-old girl knelt in silence. Her jeans were frayed at the knees, her sneakers scraped gray from miles of wandering. Her hair, dark as raven's wings, spilled across her face as she leaned close to a tiny bird trembling against the dirt. Its wing bent wrong, feathers sticking out at painful angles. The girl's hands hovered carefully above its fragile chest, as if unsure whether to touch or to pray. Raina Blackwater spoke without raising her head, her voice soft enough to hide in the breeze. "You're hurt, but you're not alone." A few yards away, a trio of kids stared with twisted amusement, their whispers sharp enough to cut. "She's talking to birds again. Forest girl thinks she's Snow White. No wonder she doesn't have any friends." Raina didn't look up. She breathed slow, steady, offering comfort the way she knew how. Not through words meant for people, but the gentle rhythm of someone who believed every living thing deserved a chance to heal. She pressed her palm over her own heart first, then carefully lowered that hand toward the sparrow. The bird fluttered with a flash of panic, then fell still. Its heartbeat thudded weakly beneath her fingertips, and she closed her eyes as if listening to something deeper than sound. Brooke Danner stood a few feet behind the hecklers, her hands clenched around the straps of her backpack. She used to play with Raina when they were younger, making mud pies near the creek, daring each other to climb the big fir behind the playground, sharing candy and secrets. But something shifted as they got older. The other girls found cracks in Raina they could poke at. Being different was dangerous here, even when different just meant loving the world too much. Brooke took one hesitant step forward. "Raina, maybe you should let the teacher know about that bird." It was meant to sound friendly, but there was a thin layer of fear coating her words. Fear of the bird, fear of the ringleaders beside her, fear of being pulled into Raina's shadow. The boys snickered louder. One nudged Brooke's arm. "Oh, come on, Brooke. Which girl doesn't need a teacher? She's probably going to bring it back to life with her magic." And Brooke, who once might have defended her, laughed. Quick, too quick, a shield made of betrayal. Raina's hand froze. The spell between her and the forest cracked just slightly. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just whispered to the sparrow again, voice trembling like a leaf trying to stay attached to its branch. "It's okay. Some people don't understand kindness." The bell rang. Kids scattered like startled quail, backpacks bouncing. Brooke hesitated one last second, eyes flicking to the small figure kneeling in the grass. Then she turned away. By the time Raina finally stood, dust clinging to her palms, the sparrow remained curled in the shade of her shadow, quiet but no longer shaking. She placed it carefully beneath the lowest branch of a nearby bush, safe from curious hands and cruel eyes. Inside the school, fluorescent lights hummed like tired insects. Raina slipped into her classroom just as Mr. Danner adjusted his glasses and tapped the chalkboard. He was a tall man with kind shoulders and a voice that usually tried to be patient. Today's lesson was about forest ecosystems, nutrient cycles, and predator-prey balance. For a moment, Raina forgot the sting of playground laughter. She raised her hand when he asked what forests need to survive. Her voice was clear and rooted with certainty. "They need room to breathe," she said. "When trees are cut down too fast, the soil gets sick, and then the water stops running clean." He blinked, surprised by the depth in her answer. The kind of knowledge that doesn't come from textbooks, but from living close to the truth. Other kids turned toward her with narrow eyes, and she lowered her gaze, knowing she'd made herself a target again. Chase Whitfield sat in the row behind her, the son of the wealthiest man in town, heir to the logging empire that fed Maple Crossing while starving the forest. His smirk carried every bit of that power. "Teacher's pet," he muttered, pushing his desk into the back of her chair. The whisper slithered into more bitter words that tasted of something older and uglier, the kind of talk he learned at home. Raina's shoulders tightened, but she didn't answer. When the bell released them into the hallway, Chase and his friends grabbed her notebook. They flipped through pages filled not with doodles of cartoons like theirs, but sketches of animal tracks, leaves pressed into corners, strange symbols carved into tree bark. They scribbled over the drawings, scrawling ugly stick figures and cruel names. The laughter exploded, echoing off metal lockers. Her notebook sailed into the trash can outside by the stairwell. Mr. Danner noticed. He paused at the doorway, eyes narrowing as he recognized his daughter's friends in the cluster of kids jeering. The weight of responsibility pressed into his shoulders. He looked at Raina, cheeks burning red, fists clenched, and for half a heartbeat, he seemed ready to intervene. But he didn't. He turned, walked away. Raina's throat ached with shame. Sometimes silence hurt more than insults. That afternoon, as the school emptied, May Blackwater pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. She was small but steady, her hair tied in a braid streaked with early silver. She knelt to pick up Raina's ruined notebook from the trash, wiping off crumbs with her sleeve. Her fingers trembled when she saw what had been drawn on the cover. Ugly shapes meant to mock who they were. She didn't lecture, didn't scold. She simply held the notebook against her chest, as though trying to keep her daughter's heart from tearing any further. They walked home together along the dirt road leading to the edge of town. Home was a faded trailer crouched near the tree line, a place that smelled of pine smoke and hand-me-down hope. They ate dinner at the tiny table under a flickering bulb, the silence thick but not empty. May reached for Raina's hand, brushing a thumb across scraped knuckles. "You're not wrong for caring," she whispered, "but you can't show the forest to people who refuse to see it." Raina didn't fully understand. She only nodded. May looked toward the dark beyond the window, a look filled with old memories and secrets. "They don't understand us. Not the way the woods do." That night, rain tapped lightly against the metal roof. Raina curled up under her blanket, staring at the glow of moonlight breaking through curtains too small to block it out. Tears finally came, slow and hot. The voices from school replayed in her skull like a radio she couldn't shut off. Witch girl, forest freak, no friends. The wind picked up, whispering through needles of the pines, and a branch scratched the side of the trailer like a cautious visitor. Raina froze, listening harder. The forest seemed awake, watching, like an animal holding its breath. She slid off the bed and tiptoed toward the small window. Her heart thudded so loud she feared whatever stood outside might hear it. She pulled the curtain back with careful fingers. The streetlight illuminated gravel and weeds, and something else. A shape bigger than any person she'd ever seen stood just beyond the glow. Impossibly tall, shoulders wide as the trunk of a young tree. It didn't move, didn't flinch under the trembling light. It simply existed there, carved out of the night. Raina's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct screamed for her to hide, to bury herself under the covers and never look again. She ducked below the sill, chest heaving. She counted to 5. Then curiosity, always her first language, tugged her eyes upward again. The shape leaned closer to the boundary between dark and light. A hand emerged. Not a paw, not a claw. A hand, massive and covered in coarse fur, with fingers long as sticks. It reached down to the large stone near the road. From its other hand, it placed something gently on the rock. A small bundle of wild grass and a single black feather shining under moonlight like obsidian dipped in silver. Raina's fear softened into awe. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, eyes wide. The figure straightened, a hush falling over the forest, and stepped backward until the darkness swallowed every piece of it. Only the soft outline of trees remained. Raina stayed awake long after the wind died. Something deep inside her, a part she'd never dared to believe in, whispered that the world was bigger than her bullies, kinder than her pain, older than the lies printed in science books. She didn't know what had left that gift. She didn't know if it meant danger or protection. All she knew was this. Someone, something, in the forest saw her, and she had been seen. The feather sat waiting at sunrise, untouched by wind or animals. She picked it up on her way to school, feeling the cool, smooth quill against her palm. She didn't show it to anyone. She tucked it inside her notebook, where no one else would understand the meaning. The forest had reached out first, and even though she didn't have the words for it yet, Raina understood that her life would never be small again. Not in Maple Crossing. Not while the forest was watching. Autumn arrived in Maple Crossing without permission. One day the trees were green, and the next they began to bleed color across the sky. Leaves drifted onto cracked sidewalks, covering the town like a thin blanket that couldn't hide what lay underneath. Time moved forward whether anyone liked it or not, and for Raina Blackwater, it carried a heaviness she could feel in her bones. The bullying hadn't stopped after that night with the feather. If anything, it grew deeper roots. Children discovered that cruelty, once fed, wanted more. They made a game of trapping her fear, of turning her kindness into a curse. The seasons changed, but the stares remained sharp. The laughter followed her like a ghost she couldn't shake. One October afternoon, after the final bell rang, Raina lingered too long at her locker. The hallway emptied except for a pair of girls whispering near the water fountain. Brooke Danner was among them, clutching her books to her stomach, eyes flicking toward Raina as though she wanted to speak but didn't know how. Before she could decide, Chase Whitfield appeared with his pack, swagger loud enough to steal all the air from the hall. He shoved the locker closed on Raina's fingers. Not enough to break them, just enough to remind her he could. "You like being alone, right?" he said, his grin too polished for a boy his age. "Let's help you practice." They dragged her to the janitor's closet, giggling as they forced the door shut behind her. The darkness closed in fast, smelling like bleach and old mop water. She pounded until her fists burned, but the sound only made them laugh harder. The light under the door flickered as their shadows danced away. Minutes stretched. Hours pretended to be minutes. Raina curled up on the cold floor, arms wrapped around her legs, listening to her own heartbeat counting down a fear she had learned too young. When the door finally cracked open, the hallway was dim and empty. Her eyes stung as she stepped into the silence the way a deer might step into a clearing, unsure what danger waited next. She walked home under a sky turning violet, the first bite of winter chilling the air. In her bedroom later that night, her hands still smelled like bleach, and the quiet pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. Days passed like that. Kids who didn't even know her name laughed behind her back. Books she left on her desk were colored over with scribbles that felt like scars. When she placed a drawing of a hawk on the teacher's table, carefully shaded with the copper tones of fall, a boy dipped his brush in dirty rinse water and threw splatters across the page. The brown stain looked like rot spreading through wings that once promised flight. Brooke watched all of it with lips pressed tight. Sometimes she turned away. Sometimes she even smiled to fit in. Shame crawled up her throat every time, but she swallowed it back down like something sour she couldn't spit out. One afternoon, Mr. Danner graded science quizzes. Raina sat in the front row, feet tapping lightly against the floor, waiting with the smallest flicker of hope. He handed her paper back with a nod that felt like sunlight. A perfect score. Above the number he had written, "You have a gift for this? Keep going." It was the first kind thing an adult had said to her in months. Raina held the paper like a fragile bird, afraid encouragement might be snatched away if she breathed too loud. Behind her, Chase stared at his own barely passing grade, his lips twisted with annoyance. When Mr. Danner turned to help another student, Chase leaned forward. "Why does someone like you get it better than the rest of us?" he hissed. "You don't belong here." Raina didn't answer. She didn't need to. The bitterness in his voice said everything. Brooke overheard, her chest tightening. She had heard her father say something similar. The memory hit her so unexpectedly she sucked in a sharp breath. Her father loved Raina's intelligence, respected her curiosity, but he never knew how those words sounded inside his own home. That night, Brooke sat at the kitchen table while Mr. Danner graded papers again. She watched him work, waiting for a chance to speak. When he finally looked up, she blurted out, "Why do you like Raina so much?" He blinked. "She asks questions other kids are afraid to ask. That's not something you see every day." Brooke gripped the edge of her chair. "Do you think she's better than me?" He set down his pen, confused. No one said that. But silence filled the spaces where reassurance should have been. And that silence left Brooke feeling smaller than ever. Meanwhile, at the Whitfield house across town, the television blared some news segment about environmental protests. Mr. Whitfield scoffed and turned up the volume, proud of every tree his company cut. Chase sat beside him, absorbing each remark like fact. "People who live off the land think they deserve everything," his father muttered. "They take, and then complain when we work for our living." Chase nodded, though he hardly understood. He knew only that his father's words made him feel tall, and someone else had to feel small to make room for that height. A few days later, Raina walked past the Whitfield yard, clutching a bag of groceries May had asked her to pick up after school. She heard the screen door slam and froze. Mr. Whitfield's voice boomed through the open window. "I won't raise a boy who bows to people who think they own the forest just because their ancestors walked here first. You stand up straight, Chase. This family doesn't kneel." Raina stood still until footsteps approached. She kept moving before anyone saw her eyes shimmer. When she got home that evening, May Blackwater was waiting on the worn-out couch, shoes still damp from mopping school hallways. She held a folded piece of paper, notes she'd scribbled after meeting with the principal. Lines of frustration crunched into the paper as she squeezed it. "They say you keep to yourself too much," May said softly. "They say you make yourself an easy target." Raina stared at the floor. "Maybe I shouldn't talk to birds." May knelt in front of her and cupped her cheeks. "Don't you ever think that, baby?" Her eyes shone with tired love. "The world doesn't get to decide your goodness, but even love sometimes arrives too late to heal a day already broken." Winter crept into Maple Crossing the way grief does, slowly, pretending to give warning, then suddenly swallowing everything in white. The forest seemed to watch more closely as cold tightened its grip. Every breath looked like smoke curling from a fire that had burned too close. Raina came home one December afternoon and found the trailer dark. The door creaked when she pushed it open, the air heavy and wrong. She called for May. No answer. She stepped into the narrow hallway, heart thudding like a drum against her ribs. She found her mother in the small bedroom. The rope, the stool kicked aside, the letter on the floor. The scream didn't come. The tears didn't fall at first. The world just stopped. Like the snow outside had frozen time itself. Raina's fingers fumbled as she picked up the note. May's handwriting was uneven, shaky. I'm sorry. I'm so tired. I tried to protect you. I love you more than anything. The tall ones in the forest once saved me. They will not abandon you. Go to the place I showed you. The world is cruel here. The forest will hold you when I no longer can. The page slipped from her hand. The silence that followed was deafening. She sank onto the floor, hugging her knees, the cold seeping through the thin carpet. She didn't know how long she stayed that way. Darkness grew outside. The wind pushed against the walls like it wanted to come inside and help her breathe. Eventually, sobs cracked through her chest, raw and violent, pulled from a part of her that had never been touched before. She cried until her voice broke into little pieces like ice shattering across the lake. Neighbors said later they hadn't heard anything, but the forest did. Later that night, someone must have called social services. Maybe Tom Garner, the quiet ranger who always watched from the edges, saw the light still on and knew something wasn't right. By the time officials drove up the road, their tires crunching fresh snow, the trailer door was open to the wind. Raina was gone. She left with a thin coat, the last crumpled dollars from May's drawer, and the note folded twice inside her pocket. She walked into the trees under a sky full of stars that didn't blink. Snowflakes landed on her eyelashes like tiny questions. Her footprints led away from Maple Crossing, away from the children who never wanted her, away from the teachers who looked away, away from the mother who tried so hard and still lost the fight. She stopped only once on the trail, turning back to see the faint outline of the town, the mill lights glowing like lonely lanterns. She whispered something into the wind. Maybe it was goodbye. Maybe it was forgive me. The trees opened their arms. Somewhere deep in the woods, a distant call rose, low, mournful, not human. It rolled across the hills like a promise. Raina kept walking. She didn't know what lay ahead, only that the world behind her no longer had room for her heart. With every step, she felt less like a girl running away, and more like a soul being led toward where she truly belonged. Into the unknown, into the cold, into the arms of something ancient that had been waiting for her all along. She didn't look back again, because forward was the only direction left, and the forest was waiting. Snow still lingered in the shaded creases of the mountains when Raina stepped out of the last logging truck that would carry her. The driver hadn't said much beyond a grunt when she climbed aboard near the ranger station off Highway 90, and he said even less when he slowed down at the edge of a gravel road choked with melting ice. She hopped down without a word, boots hitting the ground with more courage than she felt. The truck rattled off, coughing diesel into the air like a goodbye it didn't mean. She stood alone now, the tree line in front of her wide and open like a door into something older than language. Behind her was the town that had buried her mother. Ahead was the silence May once spoke of, the hush that watches, the hush that remembers. Raina pulled her hood up and started walking. The wind moved differently here, not sharp, but heavy with memory. Branches swayed above her, and she swore some of them leaned just slightly in her direction. She ate what she could when she could. Granola bars from gas stations. Half a sandwich an old woman handed her at a rest stop without asking questions. She drank from icy streams and followed deer trails until they vanished. Some nights, the ground was too frozen to sleep on, so she stayed upright, arms tucked into her coat, rocking gently to stay awake, whispering to herself that morning would come. When it finally did, it came slow, pale, and full of frostbite. Her breath curled like smoke. Her hands cracked. Her hunger turned into something quieter, something sharp. 3 days in, she reached the edge of a high ridge, where the land dipped away into a deep cut in the mountain. Wind whistled through it like a scream trapped too long in someone's throat. She stood at the edge, her toes close to the drop, her fingers numb at her sides. Down below, a creek foamed over broken rocks, the water black and fast. One step, and it would all end. No more hurt, no more lockers slamming, no more May's last letter echoing through her mind like a prayer she couldn't answer. She closed her eyes. The wind tugged at her jacket. Her knees trembled. Then, a sound. Low, guttural, wet. It didn't belong to wind or wolf or bear. It had a weight to it. A sadness that seemed to bloom in her chest the moment it reached her ears. She opened her eyes, turned her head, listened harder. It came again. Closer now. A choking snarl, cut short. Not a roar, not a howl, but something caught between pain and desperation. And somehow, it reached inside her and pulled her back from the edge. She backed away from the cliff, turning toward the sound. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. Through brush and slush, she ducked beneath low branches, followed the direction of the moan, boots crunching in wet pine needles. A raven flapped overhead, circling once before vanishing behind rock. Then she saw it. The clearing wasn't wide, just a dip in the terrain where frost still clung to the roots of trees. In the center, tangled among broken branches and bloody snow, something thrashed. Big, covered in coarse cinnamon-colored fur. The creature's right leg was twisted inside a steel trap, the kind meant for bears, iron teeth sunk into flesh and bone. Blood stained the ground. Steam rose off its back in thick, heaving plumes, and its eyes, amber, human-shaped, flared wide when it saw her. Raina froze. It bellowed and lunged toward her on all fours, arms like tree trunks, face wild with panic. She stumbled backward, tripping over a root, her head smacking hard against a rock. The world spun. A flash of sky, then ground, then black. She came to with her cheek pressed to frozen moss, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The creature was still there, but it hadn't run. It hadn't attacked. It crouched now, shoulders rising and falling with ragged breath, one hand gripping a tree for balance, the other pawing at the blood pooling beneath it. Raina didn't move right away. Her head throbbed. Her hands were shaking, but something deeper than fear guided her next motion. She sat up slowly, eyes never leaving its face. Then, voice low, barely more than wind, she spoke. "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature growled, not in threat, but in pain, and sagged back to the ground. She inched forward, palms out, whispering every step of the way. "You're bleeding bad. I can help." It didn't answer, but it didn't stop her either. She circled around to its leg. The trap was buried deep, metal biting into muscle. She could see bits of bone. She gagged, swallowed hard, forced herself to stay steady. She searched the ground for a rock big enough to wedge into the trap's hinge. It took minutes. Her fingers numbed. She wrapped her coat sleeve around her hand and braced with her whole weight. The steel creaked, snapped, opened. The creature let out a long, guttural groan and collapsed onto its side. Raina dropped beside it, panting, bloody up to her wrists. She pulled off her scarf and knelt beside the wound, reaching into her coat pocket for the only thing she had. The letter. May's last words, folded soft from the 100 times she'd read them. She hesitated, then tore the bottom corner, folded it around a bundle of moss, and pressed it against the bleeding. She wrapped it in a strip of her sleeve, tied it tight. Her mother's final message now bound to something ancient, bleeding, real. The wind paused. The trees leaned in. She stayed with it until night came. She found a hollow between rocks, a cave of sorts, and dragged what branches she could to shield them from the wind. The creature was barely conscious. She covered it with her coat, then curled against its side, the smell of wet fur and copper thick in her lungs. She didn't remember falling asleep. When she woke, the sky was charcoal blue. Her legs were numb, her stomach hollow. She started to sit up, but stopped. The creature had moved. It lay between her and the cave's mouth, its body shielding hers from the cold. Snow dusted its back. Its breath came deep and slow. She stared at it, heart tight. It had protected her. She reached out, touched its fur. Coarse, warm, alive. A sound broke the stillness. Knock, knock, knock. She sat up straighter. Knock, knock, knock. Not a branch, not an echo. It came from the stone wall behind her. 2 knocks, then 3, then 2 again. It wasn't random. She looked at the creature. Its ears twitched. The knocking repeated, measured, patterned. A language of sound made from wood and stone. She crawled to the edge of the cave, heart hammering. Outside, the snow was marked with prints, not just from the one beside her, but others. Larger, smaller, a family, a tribe. She turned back toward the creature. Its eyes were open now, watching her. "I won't go back," she whispered. The creature didn't move, didn't nod. But something in its gaze felt like understanding. She sat beside it, staring into the woods where the others had passed. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of cedar and something older, something wild. Her hands trembled. Her hunger gnawed. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Not when the forest had answered. Not when something had chosen to stay beside her. And not when she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Not really. Not ever again. Spring returned with shy steps, not in flowers or bird song, but in the sound of meltwater rushing over stones and the soft cracking of ice that had forgotten how to be still. The mountain air remained sharp, but the forest began to exhale. And in that space between frost and green, between silence and new breath, Raina Blackwater stayed. Days slipped into weeks. Weeks unfurled into months, and the forest became her clock, her teacher, her only constant. She learned the shapes of roots that curled like fingers beneath the soil. She learned that some mushrooms saved you, and some would burn a hole through your gut. She learned how to build warmth from nothing but pine needles, and which trees whispered when storms were coming. She watched a raven teach its young to fly by pushing them off a branch just high enough to scare them, but not kill them. She began to understand the brutal kindness of nature. He was still with her, the one with the wound. His leg healed slowly, but strength returned. He moved like a shadow now, quiet and massive, his breath fogging in the morning light. He had no name she could speak. Not at first. But the forest spoke in other ways. Sometimes she found claw marks etched into the bark, deep grooves spiraling in deliberate shapes. She didn't mistake them for bear. These were patterns, layered and rhythmic. One afternoon, beneath a canopy of firs, she laid her fingers over one of the symbols and whispered, "Is this your word for home?" She wasn't sure, but something stirred behind her in the trees. The presence didn't step forward, but it didn't vanish either. One evening, as dusk gathered, he placed his hand flat against a flat stone and struck it twice with the side of his fist. Then again, then once more. It was not random. It carried meaning. She mirrored the rhythm, awkward at first, unsure. But when he answered with the same pattern, slower this time, she felt the breath catch in her throat. Not fear. Something older than that. Recognition. When she awoke the next morning, a small pile of pine cones sat outside her shelter, arranged in a circle, with a single feather in the middle. A message, though she didn't yet know how to read it. She began calling him Hearth. She whispered it to herself in the dark. When the trees bent close and the wind wrapped around her bones. The name came from the warmth he gave her that first night. From the way he had shielded her from the cold when no one else had. Hearth meant the center of a fire, the place people built their lives around. And even though he never said yes or no, he never turned away when she used it. She built her own place near a bend in the creek, just out of sight from the deeper parts of the woods. A lean-to made of branches, sealed with mud and moss. Smoke curled from the tiny fire pit she dug by hand, just enough to boil water and warm her hands. She boiled pine needles to drink. She made tea from cedar. She bit into bitter roots and taught herself not to flinch. One afternoon, she found a tree that bore claw marks in 2 tight spirals, one inside the other. She sketched them in her notebook, next to her drawings of footprints and shadows. Her fingers traced the symbol again and again, wondering if it marked something sacred. When she returned the next day, she found new scratches beside her drawing. 3 parallel lines, neatly vertical. They were answering her. Hearth never brought her closer to the others. Not yet, but she felt them watching. Sometimes, as she walked the ridge, she caught glimpses. A broad figure vanishing into fog, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down like snowfall. One night she heard a chorus of knocks echoing through the trees. Different patterns, layered like music, each one from a different direction. She stood in the center and listened, heart thudding with something close to belonging. But the world beyond still pressed in. She found a rusted steel trap one morning, half buried beneath a patch of leaves. The scent of blood was still fresh. She followed it to a snare rigged between 2 saplings, wire twisted with carelessness, cruel in its design. Just past it, she saw the tracks, small, not adult-sized. One of them had nearly been caught. Raina's hands trembled as she disarmed the trap. She broke the wire. She smashed the hinge. She buried the pieces in mud and marked the spot with a stone so no one would ever walk there again. The next night she saw them. A young one, barely the height of her shoulder, stood behind a tree, blinking wide amber eyes at her. Its fur was lighter, its shoulders less broad. It shifted nervously, about to bolt. Behind it, a figure emerged, tall, muscled, protective. Not Hearth. This one moved with suspicion, with caution. She stepped in front of the child and stood between them and Raina. Her arms were low but tense, her face unreadable, shaped like the forest itself. Ancient, knowing, and hard. Raina held her breath, raised her empty hands. "I didn't hurt them," she said quietly. "I stopped the trap." The mother didn't speak, but she didn't attack. After a long moment, she turned, guiding the young one away. From that day forward, Raina felt the lines between her and them begin to blur. Not vanish, never that, but soften. The man who found her again wasn't looking for her. He was looking for signs of poachers. His boots made sounds she didn't recognize at first, heavy and certain. When she stepped from behind a tree and faced him, he dropped his thermos. Tom Garner stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. She hadn't changed as much as she thought, but the wilderness had drawn shadows under her eyes and calloused her palms. She was no longer the girl missing from Maple Crossing. She was something else now, something the forest had reshaped. He didn't try to take her back. He didn't call anyone. He sat down on a fallen log and asked what she'd learned. From then on, he came back every 2 weeks. Always alone. He brought dried food, old books about ecology, torn notebooks. She copied everything she could. She learned how to track migration patterns and sketch behavior in shorthand. She taught herself the Latin names of trees. He never asked about the ones in the woods. He didn't have to. He saw it in the care she took, in the reverence behind her drawings. He told her, "If you're gonna live with ghosts, might as well take good notes." She did. They became field journals, weather patterns, footprint sketches, feeding habits. She documented every mark she saw, every knock she heard, every gift left at her door. Sometimes she left gifts in return, shells, berries, pieces of polished glass. They disappeared by morning. Tom sent some of her notes, with names redacted, to a colleague in Seattle. A few months later, a paper surfaced in a scientific journal, quiet, speculative, but deeply curious. It spoke of unknown hominid behavior in the Pacific Northwest. It quoted Blackwater Field Observations. She kept the clipping tucked into her journal, not for glory, but for proof that the world might one day listen. When the storm came, it didn't announce itself with lightning or thunder. It came with the weight of sky sinking into earth. The slope above her camp shifted. She woke to the sound of trees groaning and water rushing where it shouldn't. Mud grabbed her legs before she could scream. She slid, tumbling. Branches scraped her arms. Her breath vanished in a rush of dirt and panic. Then, something stopped her. Not the ground. A grip. Huge, solid, familiar. He had her. Hearth's hand wrapped around her wrist. His feet braced against a root half ripped from the earth. He grunted, his whole body shaking with effort as he pulled her from the flood of soil. When they landed, she gasped, her lungs full of cold. They sat there in the wreckage, her head on his shoulder, his chest heaving. He'd come for her. The debt between them was gone, balanced. And yet it no longer felt like debt at all. That night she didn't build a fire. She rested in the hollow of a tree. And Hearth sat outside, watching the rain slide from leaves. The storm passed. The forest held its breath again. Years later, people in a town 30 miles south started whispering about a ghost who lived with shadows. A woman who walked like she belonged in the woods. A girl who vanished but never truly left. She taught part-time at a community college by the edge of town. Ecology, natural systems, field research. Her name on the roster was Blackwater. Nothing else. Students thought she was odd, brilliant, quiet, sometimes barefoot, always watching birds. She never took the bus. She never drove. She walked, disappeared into trees at the edge of the lot, where the pine needles swallowed the sound of her steps. But back in the forest, deep where maps stopped, she still slept beneath stars that no longer felt far. Her fire never smoked too high. Her food was shared when it could be. The knocks in the night continued. The patterns deepened. She belonged to no one now. Not to the town, not fully to the wild. But the forest had claimed her, gently, patiently, as one of its own, and she had let it. The envelope came on a Thursday, carried in a manila pouch spotted with drizzle, crumpled slightly at the corners like it had taken a long road to get there. Raina found it wedged in the rusted mailbox outside the community center where she taught 3 nights a week. It was heavier than it looked. She felt the shape of something hard tucked inside. Paper, sure, but also something else. She didn't open it right away. She sat in the narrow office behind the classroom, lit by one hanging bulb, the window rattling softly from the wind pressing against the hills. Her fingers traced the return address written in careful cursive. Maple Crossing High School, Class of '98 Reunion Committee. Beneath that, in less formal pen, organized by Chase Whitfield. Her stomach shifted. The name rolled around in her head, older now, but still made of the same sounds that once muttered insults in school hallways. She peeled back the flap slowly, like the letter might bite. Inside was a folded cardstock invitation printed in navy ink, an RSVP card tucked neatly beneath it. The words were simple. The date was set for October. The location was the old town hall. The list of organizers was short, but what struck her was what came next. There was a second page, different paper, thinner, a scanned copy of a handwritten note, and above it, a title, Excerpt from the Final Will and Testament of Charles Whitfield Sr. She read it twice before the meaning stuck. I taught my son all the wrong things, about people, about pride, about land, and I never told May Blackwater I was sorry before she died. If there's any courage left in this family, it has to begin with my son apologizing to hers. Raina folded the paper slowly. Her chest felt like a door she didn't remember closing. She stared at the ink until her eyes blurred. Then she reached into the envelope and pulled out the last item, a photograph. She knew it before she turned it over. Her fingers remembered the edges before her eyes did. It was old, weather-worn, probably taken with one of those disposable Kodak cameras parents used in the late '80s. 3 children. One girl with raven dark hair holding a stray mutt in her lap. Another girl, light brown hair, a baseball cap backward on her head. A boy with dirt-smudged cheeks grinning wide. Behind them, a crooked wooden fence, the edge of a playground. The moment was small, the kind you forget unless someone puts it in your hand years later. Her throat tightened. For one brief summer, that photo had been real. She placed it face down. By the time she walked outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds stayed low, pressing against the mountains like they wanted to rest. Tom Garner's truck sat idling by the curb, the same creaky Ford he'd driven since the last president. He leaned against the hood, arms crossed, a thermos steaming beside him. You got the invite," he said without turning. She nodded. "You gonna go?" She didn't answer right away. She just opened the passenger door, climbed in, and shut it behind her. The smell of pine and old coffee filled the cab. On the dashboard was a folded map with fresh pencil lines and notes about recent fire breaks. But beneath it, tucked almost casually, was a letter. From the same envelope. She glanced at Tom. He met her gaze, then looked away. "I read it. I shouldn't have, but I did." Raina picked it up slowly, unfolded the lined notebook paper. The handwriting was neater than she remembered, less jagged. It began without greeting, but with a sentence that felt like a slow exhale. "I was wrong. 100 ways, I was wrong. And I can't fix what I said, but I want to say something in front of everyone. If you come, please let me say it where it counts. Chase." She folded it again, smaller this time. The highway back to Maple Crossing hadn't changed much in 10 years. Trees lined the curves like old guardians, and the mist hung low across the ridges, painting everything in the color of memory. Tom didn't speak as he drove, and Raina didn't ask. They'd made this drive once before, a long time ago, but this time she wasn't running. When they stopped for gas at a roadside station with warped wooden siding, Raina walked inside to grab water. That's when she saw her. The girl stood by the cooler, back turned, curly dark hair spilling over a canvas jacket. She was maybe 19, 20 at most. Her skin had the warm earth tone of her people, and her posture was loose but alert. When she turned, their eyes locked. Same cheekbones, same chin, but the eyes were Chase's. The girl smiled first. "You must be Raina," she said, not asking. Raina blinked. "I guess I am. I'm Ivy, Whitfield blood. He's my brother," she added, then shrugged. "Even if he doesn't always say it out loud." Raina stepped back a fraction. The words weren't angry, just tired. Ivy leaned against the shelf, watching her. "He's trying, but he still doesn't get it. Not really." "I'm not here for him," Raina said, voice low. "Good," Ivy replied, not missing a beat. "Then maybe you'll be able to tell him what the rest of us can't." Raina wanted to ask more, about Ivy's mother, about the years hidden behind Chase's last name, but Ivy had already picked up her bottle of orange soda and was walking away. When Raina got back in the truck, Tom didn't ask what took her so long. Instead, he stared out the windshield like someone trying to find the right place to start a confession. "I called them," he finally said. "After May, the night you left. I thought they'd help. I didn't know they'd come too late." Raina didn't speak. She stared at the trees sliding past outside. "I should have gone in," he added, voice lower now. "Should have checked sooner." She turned toward him slowly. "You did what you thought was right," she said. "But I was already gone before anyone knocked." They drove the rest of the way in silence. Maple Crossing hadn't gotten bigger. If anything, it looked smaller than she remembered. The diner had a new coat of paint. The mill still groaned in the distance, coughing sawdust into the wind. But when they rounded a bend near the old logging trail, Raina saw something that hadn't been there before. A wound. The hillside was bare. Trees cut flat, roots splintered and gray. The ground was gouged with tire tracks and oil stains. A place she once walked with Hearth. Gone. She rolled down the window. The air tasted like ash and diesel. She didn't speak. She just stared until the truck passed out of sight. That night they camped just outside town, near the river that curled like a sleeping animal between the hills. The stars pressed overhead, silent and clear. Raina sat by the fire, notebook in hand, sketching the silhouette of a tree that no longer stood. She didn't hear him at first, but then, the soft rhythm of steps in the brush. A pause, a shape at the edge of firelight. Hearth stood like a statue carved from the night itself. His eyes reflected the flames, but he didn't move. Raina reached for the stick beside her and tapped 3 times against the ground. A pattern, one they both knew. Go, return again, he answered. With. She smiled. Not wide, not open, but something inside her eased. He wasn't stopping her. He was watching her go, and still promising she wouldn't walk alone. She didn't say goodbye. The trees whispered the rest for her, and far across the river, something old echoed in reply. The lights inside the old town hall glowed soft and yellow, like fireflies trapped in glass jars. From the outside, the wooden beams and faded paint looked just like they had 20 years ago, as if time had been too tired to do much more than settle a layer of dust. But inside, someone had tried. Folding tables were lined with paper tablecloths and bowls of potato chips. A Polaroid collage of school year memories curled gently at the edges on a corkboard. Country music played low from a speaker near the stage, and laughter filtered through the walls, bright and easy. But that ease shrank the moment Raina stepped through the door. The chatter faltered. Plastic cups froze halfway to lips. Someone near the photo table dropped their napkin and didn't bother to pick it up. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She stood there a second longer than necessary, long enough to make the silence uncomfortable, then kept walking. She wore dark jeans tucked into worn boots and a flannel shirt rolled up to her elbows, damp from the mist outside. Her braid was long, still damp at the ends, and her face unreadable. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't need it. Her expression said she hadn't come here for small talk. She spotted Tom standing near the back wall, hands in his pockets, nodding to a couple of older alumni trying not to stare. He gave her a look, calm, solid, the kind of look that meant, if it went bad, he'd be there. She didn't need it, but she appreciated it just the same. Across the room, Chase Whitfield stood behind a podium on the stage, paper in his hand. His hair was shorter now, a little grayer at the temples, but his shoulders still had that same posture, proud, maybe even rehearsed. He spotted Raina and stiffened. His hand twitched against the microphone. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, voice louder than it needed to be. 10 years, since we walked out of these halls. Some of us went far. Some stayed. Some disappeared for a while. His eyes found hers again. But we're here now, and that counts. He paused, swallowed hard. I wanted to say something personal. Something I should have said a long time ago. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. From a table near the wall, Brooke Danner leaned back in her chair, swirling a plastic cup of punch. Her lips curled slightly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Chase looked down at his paper. When I was a kid, I was taught things that weren't true. About people, about land, about what made someone worth respecting. I believed them because they came from my father, and I let them turn me into someone I'm not proud of. He looked back up. I said things to you, Raina Blackwater, that I can't take back. I hurt you. I helped make your world smaller, and I never paid for it. But I'm saying this now, in front of everyone who matters. I'm sorry. There was no applause. No one moved. It wasn't a moment for celebration, just breath held tight, waiting. Then Brooke stood up, clapping twice, slow and sharp. The room tensed. Nice speech, she said, her voice slicing through the stillness. You rehearse it in the mirror. Chase stiffened. Brooke, no, really, that was touching. She took a step forward, unsteady. Her heels clicked against the wood floor. All this time, you thought a little public guilt would make it better? Stop, Chase said. Quieter now. Brooke turned to the room. Y'all remember what we used to call her? Little forest freak, right? Dirty squaw? Witch girl? Gasps, shuffled feet, but no one interrupted. Brooke laughed once, bitter. Funny thing is, I don't even think I hated her. I think I just didn't want to be her. You know what my dad used to say to me? She looked at Raina now, eyes glassy. Why can't you be more like Raina? Raina didn't flinch. She waited, steady. Brooke's voice cracked. Even after you were gone, he still said it. She sat down hard, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The room stayed silent. In the corner, Ivy Sky stood quietly near the refreshment table. She hadn't said a word all night. But now her fingers gripped her paper cup tighter, knuckles white. She stared at Chase, waiting. He shifted uncomfortably. Ivy, he began, but stopped. She didn't help him. She waited. Chase closed his eyes. Then, louder this time. This is my sister. Whispers broke across the room. A few gasps. One woman turned to her husband and mouthed something he didn't answer. My father had another child, Chase continued. He didn't have the courage to acknowledge her. But I do. Ivy is family. He stepped away from the microphone. From the back, Mr. Danner stood slowly. His face was pale. His eyes avoided everyone's. I was a teacher once, he said, barely above a whisper. I saw things I didn't stop. Kids being cruel, words being carved into desks, books tossed into trash cans. I saw it all, and I did nothing. No one said a word, but something shifted. An older woman near the front nodded slowly. A man near the doorway lowered his gaze. Outside, thunder cracked. The lights flickered once, then again. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows. A tree branch scraped against the glass like a warning. The power died. Screams broke out. Someone dropped a drink. In the dark, bodies collided. Tables scraped across the floor. Raina stood still. She could feel the shift, not panic, not just yet. She moved toward the window. Lightning flashed, and in that brief instant, she saw it. A shadow outside, tall, massive. Eyes that glowed like coals. Someone shouted, "There's something out there!" A man, already half drunk, grabbed the hunting rifle mounted on the wall, a decoration from some forgotten time. He fumbled to unhook it, raised it toward the dark window. Tom grabbed his wrist just in time. "Put it down! You saw that thing!" I said put it down. The man trembled, but he lowered the gun. Rain slammed the roof like fists. A boom of thunder rattled the glass. Then a scream. "Brooke!" Raina turned. Brooke was hunched over, hands on her knees, gasping. A dark stain spread across the floor beneath her. "My water," she sobbed. "It broke." People scattered. Someone shouted for towels, someone else for help. But there was no power, no phones, no signal, no way out until the storm passed. Raina dropped beside her, voice calm but firm. "Lay her down." Brooke shook her head, teeth clenched in pain. "It's too early." "I know." Raina turned to the crowd. "I need blankets, clean ones, water, someone get candles." The room moved in motion, stunned but obedient. Raina peeled off her flannel and folded it beneath Brooke's head. "Breathe," she whispered. "Just breathe." Outside, the back door creaked. Raina's head snapped up. The wind slammed it wide open, and through the swirling rain, something entered. It moved low, crouched, but filled the frame like a living monument. People screamed. It stepped forward. Hearth. He didn't roar, didn't bare teeth. He moved with purpose, eyes focused on Raina. She stood. She tapped her boot against the floor. One knock, then two, then one. He answered. Three, then three more. Safe. He walked past the tables, past the terrified crowd, past the trembling man still holding the gun in his lap. He knelt beside Brooke. She gasped, eyes wide. Raina moved fast. "He's not here to hurt you." Brooke whimpered, shaking. "What is he?" "He's going to keep you warm." Raina helped Hearth ease down beside her, his massive form curling gently around her back like a wall of heat. The room fell into stunned silence. Brooke's breathing slowed. Raina held pressure against her stomach. "The baby's not ready," she murmured. "But we'll try. We'll keep you here." Sweat beaded Brooke's forehead. Her eyes fluttered. "I was a coward," she said, barely audible. "I laughed when they hurt you." "I know. I wanted to stop them, but I didn't." Raina didn't answer, just kept her hands firm. "My dad, he never looked at me the way he looked at you." Raina met her gaze. "My mom died thinking no one would help me," Brooke sobbed. "Would she want you to help me now?" Raina blinked, jaw tight. "No, she'd want me to do better." Outside, sirens howled in the distance, fading then returning. Stuck somewhere behind a flood or a downed tree. Brooke's body jolted, then stilled. The room waited. Raina pressed her ear close, then whispered brokenly, "I can keep you here, but I can't keep the baby." No one moved. No one spoke. In the quiet, Ivy walked forward. She stood beside Chase and said nothing. He looked at her, then faced the room. "This is my sister," he repeated, "and I will not hide her." Mr. Danner sat down on the floor. The old floor creaked beneath him. One by one, others looked away. Some in shame, some in awe. No one clapped, no one cheered. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the warmth from Hearth's body steamed against the chill. And when the EMTs finally burst through the door 20 minutes later, they found Brooke stable, pale, shaking, but alive. She looked up at Raina as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Her voice barely made it through her lips. "Will you ever forgive me?" Raina's hands were still bloody. She didn't smile. "I don't know." She stepped back. "But I didn't let you die. That's what I can do." Then Hearth stood, let out one low, broken growl, and somewhere in the room, someone began to cry, because the sound was human, and no one could tell who, in that moment, had saved whom. The storm had passed, but the air still carried that trembling hush that follows a night full of too much thunder and too many truths. The sky above Oregon's forest line was heavy with silver clouds, and light sifted through them like dust in a chapel, soft and sacred. Raina stood near the clearing alone, eyes fixed on the smoldering remains of the cabin. Nothing burned anymore, but the scent of scorched wood clung to everything like regret that wouldn't wash off. Her palms were still dirty from digging, not for something, but for someone. For pieces of the truth buried too long. She didn't speak as she moved, didn't cry either. Her boots pressed down over the mud, the soaked earth making a sucking sound beneath each step. She didn't flinch when the radio on her belt crackled faintly. Her fingers flicked it off without looking. There was too much noise already, too many voices, old ones, loud ones, and the kind that didn't use words. She reached the tree where the child had stood the night before. The boy who wasn't a boy. The creature with eyes too knowing for his size, standing half in shadow, half in sorrow. The memory carved itself into her like a blade that had taken its time. Sprigg, he hadn't run last night. Not after the fire, not after the chaos. He had waited, had looked her in the eyes as if to ask something she hadn't been ready to answer. And then he vanished into the dark, quiet as grief. Now, in the daylight, Raina could see the trail. Not prints exactly, no heel, no tread. But things had bent. Moss, grass, branches. The forest remembered where he'd passed. She followed. The path wound north through an older part of the forest. Pines stretched tall and thin like guardians. Sunlight scattered in little gold knives through the branches. A jay shrieked once and then fell silent. And still Raina moved, deeper, quieter. She had ditched her pack, took only what mattered. A canteen, her grandfather's knife, and the old harmonica that hadn't made a sound in years. The deeper she went, the more the forest changed. Trees stood older, air cooler. The hush took on a reverence, like she'd walked into a cathedral she didn't know she believed in. And then she saw it. A stone. No, several. Arranged. A shape. Circles within circles, feathered with pine needles, fresh. In the center, one red feather, bright, clean, as if placed. She knelt, not to touch, but to understand. And then something moved. It wasn't loud, just the sound of weight shifting behind the undergrowth. But her breath caught. She stood, slowly, no sudden motion, just enough to turn her head. And there he was. Not Sprig, another, taller, older. His face scarred in streaks of pale gray fur. His chest broader than a man's, but his posture so still, so contained. He looked carved out of something ancient. His eyes weren't amber like Sprig's. They were the color of burned honey, darker, deeper, and terribly sad. Raina didn't reach for her radio, didn't move at all. He stepped forward, one foot, then another. His gaze never left hers, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He knelt. The earth made no sound beneath him. He bowed his head, not in submission, not fear, but something quieter, older, like he was honoring the moment, or her. And in his massive hand, he held something out. It was small, wrapped in old cloth, a strip of faded flannel, blue, white, stained dark in one corner. Raina's throat dried. Her boots didn't move. Her lungs forgot their rhythm. The creature waited. She stepped forward, one pace, then another. When she reached him, she held out both hands. He laid the bundle gently into them, careful as if it were a bird's egg. She unwrapped it. Inside, there was a photo, water-damaged, torn at one edge. But she knew the face. A boy, no more than 10, grinning, a missing front tooth, dirt on his chin, holding something. No, someone. A younger Sprig. She looked up, breath shaking. The creature spoke without speaking. She understood. This was not about finding something lost. This was about returning something sacred. The man, no, the father, rose to full height again. He placed his massive hand to his chest once, then to his forehead, and then he turned, not into the trees, but toward her, and in a voice like boulders sliding under the weight of years, he whispered a word. Raina! It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her jaw locked, and her heart pounded so hard she thought the harmonica might shake loose from her bag and play its own dirge. He stepped away, vanished. No rustling, no crashing. Gone. And Raina stood there, alone again. But somehow less so. That night, she sat by what was left of the fire pit near her tent. No marshmallows, no stories, just silence and the scent of pine. The photo sat in her lap, the feather tucked into her journal. She didn't need notes anymore. The forest had spoken, and it remembered everything. When the first howl rose in the distance, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like mourning, or music, or maybe both. Raina closed her eyes and whispered back, not words, just breath, just presence. And somewhere in the trees, something listened. The wind that morning carried no scent of rain, but something deeper, like the final page of a book left open too long. In the high timberline where the pines thinned and the moss grew older than memory, Raina Blackwater stood by the stone. Her father's name was etched there now. Beneath it, freshly carved, was her mother's. It was not a grave. The Blackwaters didn't bury their dead. They remembered them into the land, and the land never forgot. She knelt beside the smooth stone, fingers tracing the worn grooves like a child learning to read grief. The air was still. Somewhere below the ridge, a raven called once, and silence took it back. It had been 9 months since the cabin fire. 9 months since that night when everything burned, barn, fence line, lies, illusions, and left only the truth standing in smoke. Bigfoot was not a story, not a shadow in the woods, not a ghost you whisper about to keep children from wandering. They were real, and one of them had saved her life. More than that, they had changed it. She no longer lived in town. She no longer wore the badge. What use was law when the oldest laws had been broken, when what was natural had been hunted, and what was wild had shown more humanity than some humans ever could? Raina had chosen silence. A different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of shame or stubbornness or pride. This was a silence full of listening, of learning, of watching how the trees told time and how the river grieved when no one came to visit. But today wasn't just for remembering. Today, she had to go back. She stood, her long coat brushing the dirt and pine needles. She had cut her hair short now. It didn't fall over her face anymore. The scars on her arm had faded to something pale and quiet. Her boots were worn, but solid. She packed only what she needed. Knife. Canteen. A folded flannel shirt that had once belonged to her brother. And the carved totem the creature had left behind the morning after the fire. Smoke blackened, but intact. The figure was unmistakable. A mother Bigfoot holding a small child. Beneath them, a hollow where someone could hide. She strapped it across her pack and started down the trail. The woods had shifted since spring. They breathed slower. Old trails were blocked. Others had emerged where none existed before. Animals moved differently now, quieter, as if they too had learned to listen better. Even the deer paused longer before stepping into clearings, like they were waiting to see if the forest gave permission. At dusk, she reached the edge of where it happened, the hollow. It had grown over since then. Ferns reclaiming the soil, saplings rising like hope. But the memory remained, sharp and unblinking. This was where the child had screamed, where the trap had snapped, where blood had touched the earth and didn't sink in. She waited. No flashlight, no camera, no offering of food, just her. At first, there was only the wind. Then the hush of leaves disturbed, not broken, not trampled. A rhythm too large for any deer, too patient for any bear. She didn't turn around. She just whispered, "I kept my promise." The air thickened. Heat pressed against her back, not harsh, but alive, the way a storm watches you before it speaks. A hand, larger than any human's, lowered from the dark. In it, a stone, oval, warm, etched with a single line down its center, like a divide or a choice. She took it, then turned, and saw her, the mother Bigfoot, taller than memory, fur darker than ash, eyes not gold, not brown, but something in between, amber like sap caught in time. Her face was not beastly, not grotesque, not human, and yet unmistakably maternal. The kind of face that had endured centuries of loss but still chose gentleness. Behind her, two young ones peeked out, taller now, no longer children but not yet grown. One of them held a stick, carved clumsily into the shape of a bird. They stared at Raina, unblinking. She lowered her head, a gesture of respect she had learned from watching, not from books. "I came to return this," she said, unclasping the totem from her pack. "He's safe, with a man I trust, a man who listens to trees better than people." The creature stepped forward, not aggressive, just close enough that Raina could see the scar along her side. A hunter's bullet had left it. Long healed, but not forgotten. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was no woman. No beast, only two mothers, both having lost, both having fought, both choosing something other than fear. The creature took the totem, not with greed, not with anger, with reverence. And then, from behind her, the young one, the boy, stepped forward. The same one Raina had cradled that night, soot on his fur, panic in his breath. He held out the carved bird. It was rough, uneven, splintered in places, but it was made by his hands, his choice. She knelt, reached out slowly, and took it. Their hands touched, warm, steady, familiar. Then the mother stepped back, one nod, and they vanished. No crashing, no noise, just gone. Raina sat there for a long time, the carved bird in her hand, the stone in her pocket, and something in her chest, cracking open the way frost breaks a branch. But not to destroy it, to let the sap run again. She didn't cry. She breathed, and when the moon rose, she smiled, not because it was over, but because it wasn't. Because the story would go on. Not in headlines, not in photographs, but in the hush between wind and tree. In the child who asked the right question. In the elder who remembered. In the silence that finally learned how to speak. In the quiet places of this world, where the trees remember every secret ever whispered beneath them, there lives a truth we often forget. Kindness is never wasted. A single act of courage, a single moment of choosing compassion over fear, can reshape the path ahead, not only for one life, but for countless others who may never know the source of their blessing. We walk through this life carrying invisible weights. Grief we never asked for. Pain that arrived uninvited. Scars that refuse to fade even when the years stretch long behind us. It is easy to close the door, to build walls so high that the wind cannot reach us anymore. It is easy to believe that the world is indifferent, that no one is listening, that no one sees. But the truth is quieter than that. It waits in the gentle rustle of branches, in the unspoken forgiveness of the earth beneath our feet, in the small hands that reach out despite generations of fear telling them not to. Every heart, no matter how broken, still carries a light. Sometimes faint, sometimes trembling, but alive. And when that light finds the courage to rise again, to guide another soul through the dark, it becomes something stronger than the shadows that once tried to smother it. There are places in this world where humanity and wildness meet, not as enemies, but as mirrors, where we remember that long before fences, long before fear taught us to point fingers and draw lines, we shared the same sky, the same water, the same desire to protect those we love. The distance between us and them is not as wide as we once believed. And when a hand dares to cross that distance, gently, humbly, something ancient and hopeful stirs awake. There will always be those who choose cruelty, those who cling to fear because it feels safer than understanding. But there will also always be those who choose love, those who show up even when it hurts, those who extend warmth into places where cold once claimed ownership, those who prove that survival and grace can exist in the same breath. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It does not pretend wounds never existed, but it refuses to let the past decide the future. Healing is not a single moment. It is a long road walked with trembling legs and stubborn hope. And every step taken toward empathy, every step that edges us closer to seeing one another fully, that is victory. May we remember that strength is not always loud. Sometimes, strength is the quiet decision to stay soft in a world that tried to harden us. Sometimes, strength is the belief that if we choose love today, it might teach someone else to choose love tomorrow. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this story. If it touched you, even just for a moment, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. What part stayed with you? What pieces of your own heart you found along the way? Please leave a comment, like the video if it meant something to you, and subscribe to join this growing community of people who believe in compassion, in wonder, and in the shared heartbeat between all living things. Because the story doesn't end here. As long as there is kindness left in the world, the story will always continue.